Today, we're going to learn a really interesting skill that not many people really think about, which is how to ignore yourself. I've worked with a ton of people as an addiction psychiatrist, and I've noticed that helping my patients conquer addiction really involves teaching them how to ignore some of their impulses and desires. And the better they get at ignoring themselves, the better off they tend to do. And you may have struggled with this as well, where like you wake up on a particular day and there's something that there's like the right choice and there's the wrong choice. And even if you make the right choice, the real problem with that is that there's no credit tomorrow. Making the right choice today doesn't actually make the right choice easier tomorrow. In fact, oftentimes what I find with people that I work with is that they can make the right choice for a day or 2 days or 3 days, but eventually you sort of return to making the wrong choice and you're kind of back to square one. And today we're going to teach you how to crack that cycle. And this is something that the yogis and the Stoics discovered. They sort of discovered this ability to ignore yourself. And if you kind of focus on that, a lot of happiness will come and life will become easier. So we're going to start with a really famous story that sort of illustrates this principle. And there's this guy in ancient India named Arjun, and he has this charioteer named Krishna. And Arjun is on the cusp of a civil war. It's the dawn of battle, and on two sides of the civil war are actually sets of cousins. And so Arjun is about to go into battle, and he starts to despair. And he's like, I actually don't think that fighting for the kingdom is worth it. Like, the kingdom is material, and like, is it really like that important? These are my cousins. These are my family. There are even some of my friends on the other side. My teachers are on the other side. I don't want to kill them. And so he struggles and he despairs. And what he really wants to do is retreat from the field of battle instead of engaging and like fighting against his teachers who he loves and respects. So what Krishna explains to Arjun is that, listen, I understand that you don't want to fight and I understand that you're not despairing, but there are a couple of key things you need to understand about the nature of happiness and suffering and how engaging in action affects those two things. And one of the most important principles that Krishna teaches Arjun is he says, okay, Arjun, look at yourself right now. You feel despair, right? What is the nature of despair and should you listen to it? And essentially what Krishna teaches Arjun is this concept of homeostasis, that anytime we have some kind of emotion or impulse, if we actually do nothing about the impulse, that impulse will disappear and even our emotions will return to a baseline state of homeostasis. Hey, just a quick note. A lot of people will ask us, what do I do next? And that's why we built Dr. K's Guide. It's a comprehensive resource that distills over 20 years of my experience, both as a monk and as a psychiatrist. And it's designed in a way that's tailored to fit your needs. So if you're interested in better understanding your mind and taking control of your life, check out the link below. The suffering that you have in life is because you follow your emotions instead of not reacting to them. So if you listen to the despair and you flee from the field of battle, over time, this will actually lead to more suffering. Because the whole reason that you're fighting in the first place is because your cousins are like abusive and assholes. And even if you run away, they're going to keep chasing you. He doesn't actually go into all that detail, but he sort of points out to him that it is following our negative emotions and letting them control us that actually leads us to the most problems in life. And think about this in your situation, right? So like, I'm socially anxious. I feel awkward when I go to a party, so I'm going to stay home. And even if I give in to that social anxiety and avoid that awkwardness, what happens over time? I become lonely. And as I become lonely, I start to think to myself, oh my God, I'm so pathetic. I'm so lonely. I have no friends. Then if you listen to that, you'll sort of, even when you go to a party, you're going to have all those thoughts in your head and you're kind of giving in to those thoughts. And even if you force yourself to go to the party, it's going to be really, really hard and you're going to feel pathetic and it's going to be hard for you to make friends. And the whole cycle will repeat itself. So what Arjun basically learns from Krishna is that any kind of emotions that you have, if you let them control you, will lead to suffering. So there's another really illustrative example of this, which is people who are like bridezillas. And this is a little bit offensive towards women because I'm sure there are groomzillas too, but these are the stories that you don't hear about groomzillas on the internet. But I've worked with a lot of people who really wanted the perfect wedding. And the main thing that I noticed is like, how long does the happiness from the perfect wedding last? Oftentimes, the people who strive really hard for the perfect wedding are the ones who are actually getting divorced between 1 and 3 years. And even when I'm working with patients who are going through a divorce very rapidly after getting married, I'll ask them questions about like, hey, like how important was having a perfect wedding to you? And oftentimes what I discover is that they really wanted a perfect wedding, but things weren't perfect. And then they harbor some resentment, which actually forms the seed of the destruction of their marriage. So what Krishna basically teaches Arjun is that, listen, bro, any kind of emotions that you have to really learn how to resist them. And resisting the impulse is actually going to be the foundation of taking the right action. Now, this is really important to understand from a scientific perspective as well. When we think about making the right choice or doing the right thing, we don't understand that these are actually two discrete cognitive tasks at play. So let's say I want to eat a burger, but instead I want to force myself to eat a salad. There's healthy option and there's unhealthy option. So choosing the salad is actually two cognitive tasks. One is resisting the impulse of the burger, and the second is forcing yourself to eat the salad. So there is kind of resisting the desire, and then there is choosing the thing that you don't want to do. The real problem that people fall into, the reason that this can feel repetitive and like you're not making progress over time, is because we don't actually focus on the two tasks separately. So if you sort of think about, like let's say I want to renovate my house, building like a new wall requires me breaking down the wall first. So like getting rid of the bad thing is the first step to doing the right thing. The problem is in our society today, we are also goal-focused and outcome-focused, that we just think about doing the right thing. We don't think about avoiding the wrong thing. And sort of think about moving towards your goals. No one thinks about, hey, I didn't screw up today as an important step towards my goals, right? That's not actually progress. That's just doing nothing. And doing nothing isn't progress, so we don't even try to do it. And this is the huge mistake that we make. If you look at neuroscience research on people with addictions, what you find is that they have 6 discrete neuroscientific deficiencies. And one of those key deficiencies is the ability to resist impulses. Every single person I've worked with who has conquered addiction starts with the very fundamental step of doing nothing and learning how to ignore their desires and ignore their impulses. So this involves a couple of techniques. The first is following the timeline of your desires. So this is also something in addiction psychiatry, or like especially like AA and peer support recovery, called playing the tape through to the end. So when we have an impulse, we don't really pay attention to what the cost of this impulse is or what giving into it really costs us over time. So I'll give you all a simple example. I am browsing this thing called the internet, and I am on Reddit, and someone on Reddit says something stupid. And what do? Oh man, time to put this noob in their place. I argue with them back and forth for like 45 minutes. I write 2,000 words of text. I reply, they reply, and then something dangerous starts to happen. My replies start getting downvoted, and their replies start getting upvoted. And so things start going downhill, right? I'm trying to put this noob in their place on the internet, but like now I'm feeling a little bit more frustrated. I've spent about an hour arguing with them, and I'm like, and then I load up a video game, or I open up YouTube, or I start scrolling stuff on TikTok or whatever. And then I spend the next hour or two like decompressing from getting owned on the internet. And at the end of that, what have I learned? Absolutely nothing, right? The next day rolls around and you don't ever stop to think like, okay, hold on a second. I had a desire to reply to someone on the internet. And when I gave into that desire, what was the consequence of that action? What did it actually cost me to not ignore myself? When I listened to myself and I wanted to put this noob in their place, I spent an hour writing 2,000 words instead of, that is like 1/40th of a nonfiction book. That is like 1/40th of a novel. You spent that amount of time writing 2.5% of a book, arguing with someone on the internet. And after you got owned on the internet, then you gave in to another impulse, which is now I feel bad. So what am I going to do to feel better? I'm going to start opening up a video game and I'm going to start playing it. So this is what Krishna teaches Arjun. Pay attention to the timeline of your desire. As you give in to your impulse, what actually happens over time? Study it scientifically. When you do this, it engages other parts of your brain. And the key thing that it engages is your hippocampus and your learning circuitry. So it requires some amount of conscious attention and reflection to actually learn the price of giving into your impulses. The next thing that we're going to focus on is how to resist our impulses. And this is the key discovery that both the Stoics and the yogis made. That if you want life to be easy, the most important thing to conquer is actually your own desires. That the more non-reactionary you can be, the more control you will have over your life. And so if you kind of think about Stoicism, what is Stoicism? Stoicism is not letting your impulses, your emotions, your desires actually determine what you do. So how can we build up this skill? Because this is absolutely like a function in the brain called impulse control that we can train through certain practices. So the first is meditation. And I'll even do this with like my 4-year-old kid. So what we'll sort of do is I'll have them meditate, and then I'll take a feather and I'll tickle them under the nose or under the chin or somewhere else. And I tell them, okay, we're going to play a game where you're not supposed to move at all. And daddy's going to try to tickle you. And then they get to try to do it to me too, which is lots of fun. But it works really well because what we're actually doing, what's happening in their brain is they have an impulse to move. But what are they doing in that moment? They are exerting control over that impulse. They're resisting the impulse. And the really cool thing is, as I've done this practice with my kids over time, their ability to resist the pull of screens has actually skyrocketed. They can actually self-regulate themselves as they practice these kinds of skills. So for y'all, you can't really do this, the feather tickling yourself because someone else has to do it for you, but there are other techniques that you can do. So one of my favorites is something called trataka. So trataka is fixed point gazing. And that's what we're going to do is look at a candle and we're going to sort of stare at the flame without blinking. So we'll teach y'all more how to do that. We've got videos on that on YouTube, and you can also check out Dr. K's guide for like the details of how to do that technique. But you can basically do any kind of mindfulness technique, provided that you really focus on resisting whatever impulses you have. So if you're doing a different technique, like a breath technique, then if you've got an itch or a scratch or you want to shift, just do your best not to do that. And literally what you'll be doing is strengthening your brain and its capacity to resist impulses. The other thing that you can do, which is sort of like more of an organic meditation technique, is anytime you go to a restaurant, don't order the thing that you want to order. So I'm not saying you have to order your least favorite dish, right? But what we really want to practice is not forcing yourself to do something that you dislike, because remember, that's the second part of the equation. What we really want to do is resist the impulse to eat what you want. So this is where it's actually way easier, but what I'd say is pick number 2 on your list or pick number 3 on your list. Just don't pick your most favorite thing to order at the restaurant. Resist that impulse. So I know it sounds kind of weird, but one of the most important skills that people don't practice is how to ignore yourself. This is the foundation of what the Stoics and yogis discovered, that if you want to have control and happiness in your life, ignoring yourself is actually the first step. And this is becoming increasingly important in today's society because of things like technology. Because what is technology actually doing? As we get more and more cookies added to our browsers and stuff like that, people know what you want, and they're going to trigger different desires in you, right? This is why we have notifications on your phone, to trigger desires and trigger impulses. And technology is becoming harder and harder to resist. And it's not just in technology. There's also been some really fascinating research recently that additives in food will neuroscientifically induce cravings. So even the food that we eat is actually inducing impulses within us and trying to get us to eat things. So if you want control over your life and you want to like reduce your unhealthy eating habits, maybe tackle things like obesity, stop using technology, and stop giving into your emotions, take the road that the Stoics and yogis took and actually learn how to ignore your impulses.